Some of it I just don't understand. I was just about to say, I walked into communication theory last year, and then they all had the Eric and all the work.
Okay, so I was making sure that I understood this. So this is the way that these guys work. You press one button to make it live, and then one button to turn it off. The easiest way to move it is just to slide them, but we've got two in case you're not the kind of person who likes speaking right into the microphone, but if you would like to have a closer connection, feel free to drag them over. And we also made sure that you have a little bit of space on the other side of you so you're not sitting on top of each other. Do you need anything from me? Okay, the general setup of tonight is going to be like this. As I think I shared with you before, we're going to play clips from the documentary and use those as discussion prompts. I'll then either direct questions to one of you, all of you, or the audience, but I'll make sure to say your name. If I ask you a question and you go, actually, I'd really like to hear Abigail's perspective on it since you don't feel comfortable answering it, or if you just go, I'm having a moment, I don't know what to say about this issue, feel free to throw it off to somebody else. Throw it out to the audience. We told them all that it's audiences, like participation is strongly encouraged. So, yeah, and if you need to tap out or anything, just let me know. I'll do a dance. That should be a good enough distraction. Okay. Oh, you have your cue? Where's Emery? Oh, there you are. Do you have your cue?
Okay,
I'll grab it. So, yes, Jerry confirmed. They're live when you're holding them, so they mute themselves when they're in motion.
With that technology.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the WCBA Equity and Inclusion Committee's inaugural event in honor of Women's History Month. The event is called Misrepresentation, Revisiting the Discussion, and I'm so thrilled that all of you are here this evening. If you are here because you are a student in one of my classes, I am Shelley Blundell from the Journalism and Communication series in the Department of Communication. Please send me an email so that I know you are here. Same goes for Professor Elyse Gessler. But if you are here because you are as excited as I am about this event, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to get started by reading you a brief little blurb of how things are going to work this evening. Elyse, who really is to be commended for doing most of the legwork on this, decided that we should revisit, in honor of Women's History Month, the documentary Misrepresentation. It's just over a decade old, and it's a good comparative analysis piece so we can see how far things have come and how far we still have to go. Misrepresentation was written and directed by documentary filmmaker and actor Jennifer Lynn Siebel-Newsom, and it shone a light on the historic underrepresentation of women in positions of power and influence in the United States, and how this underrepresentation is perpetuated through mainstream media and cultural representations and misrepresentations of powerful women. The way we're going to do this, as opposed to a traditional movie showing or a traditional panel discussion, is we are going to show you clips from the documentary and use those clips to formulate questions that we will direct to one of the panelists, all of the panelists, or to all of you. Let me introduce you to Dr. Emery Ulusoy in the front, Dr. Duri Song. Those weird little die cube things that they're holding are actually microphones. So if we throw out a question to the audience and you would like to answer it, please just raise a hand. I promise you I ask them to throw gently. They do mute when they're in the air, but once you hold them, they will be live. And we really do hope to make this a good interactive event. So without further ado, I would like to introduce briefly our three panelists, because I would like them to speak for themselves. To my right, your left, we have Professor Elyse Gessler, who is a lecturer in the Department of Communication here at YSU. Next to her, we have Abigail Clouter, a news reporter with WKBN, who is also a recent graduate of our journalism program. And at the very end, we have Phil Hall, who is the co-host of History's B-Side podcast, and actually is an alum of WCBA 2014, correct? So I am going to hand things over to them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to see so many of you out there. As Shelley mentioned, my name is Elyse Gessler. I'm actually a two-time graduate of Youngstown State University, and I now have the privilege to teach here. So, hi, American Psychology. We're very excited. We're very excited to show this to you. But my particular focus is gender issues in media, as well as advocacy in media. So this event has been a wonderful representation of everything we're working on in the DEI committee and WCBA. I'm really excited to have this as our first event for the committee, but I'm going to pass it over to Abby.
Hi everybody, I'm really excited to see you guys here and especially see a lot of young women, especially a couple young women I know who are also going into media. So I'm excited to share my experiences in the last couple of months as a woman in broadcast media, specifically where your appearance plays and your gender kind of plays a big role in your work.
Hi, I'm Phil. Like Dr. Blundell said, I'm a graduate of WCBA and I co-host a podcast called History's B-Side. I am not a woman in the media, but I have read and researched about a few of them, although normally I have a laptop and a whole bunch of cushions in front of me, so it's nice to have real people to look at and talk to. But yeah, I'm excited. I got to actually watch some of the documentary today, get a little bit of background on it. I hope I can offer a little bit of insight, although I like to tell people I'm not professional by any means or know a whole lot of what I'm talking about other than what I tried to read and research briefly. But I appreciate being invited to be a part of this. I think it's really cool.
Thank you, panelists. All right, I am going to show our first clip from the documentary Misrepresentation, and then I will ask our first question of all of you.
Association has found in recent years that self-identification has become a national epidemic, a national problem. The more women and girls self-objectify, the more likely they are to be depressed, to have eating disorders, they have lower confidence, they have lower ambition, they have lower cognitive functioning, they have lower GPAs. How does this connect to women in leadership? Women who are high self-objectifiers have lower political efficacy. Political efficacy is the idea that your voice matters in politics and that you can bring about change in politics. So if we have a whole generation of young people being raised where women's objectification is just par for the course, it's normal, it's okay, we have a whole generation of women who are less likely to run for office and less likely to vote.
So on that note, I would like to ask of everyone in the audience, do you feel that your voice matters in politics? And if you would like to make a comment, please lift your hand and Dr. Song and Ulusoy will throw you one of our mic cubes. Oh boy, it feels like 8 a.m. news reporting one all over again. All right, so what I'm going to do is to sort of get everybody in the groove. Let me ask the panelists, and if one of you would like to comment on this, and this is just from a very general perspective, do you feel your voice matters in politics?
I would say, yeah, I do, just because I grew up seeing more women in politics than I think even like people like my mom grew up seeing. So in that sense, I think when you see yourself and see yourself represented in those positions of power, it makes you feel like you could be in one of those positions one day, or that the people in power are listening to you because they've had similar experiences to you. Not that we don't have a long way to go, because we definitely do, but seeing things like that helps a lot.
All right, I won't torture you anymore. We'll move on to clip number 2, but we'll be coming back.
One of the first things I did when I became mayor of San Francisco was I appointed a female police chief and then a female fire chief. When they both show up at the podium in a disaster, a lot of national media will look there and say, well, where's the police chief? She's right here. Where's the fire chief? She's right here. People thought I was trying to make some grand statement, when in fact I was actually just hiring the most qualified 2 candidates. The incredible opposition was women, and those that feel it's too much, too soon, too fast. They never would have questioned that had they been men.
You know. Okay, so we have 2 questions that accompany this, none for you all, so you can take a breath. Our first question is for Professor Gessler. In your research into gender issues and communication, have you found evidence that supports the idea that women are harsher on women leaders than men?
Absolutely. We know this to be true. Because of the long-term suppression that women have felt and the lack of inclusion in media and a lot of other professional realms, other women are not good at lifting each other up. It's definitely a problem that we see. We actually just had a graduate student recently complete a study where she found the same occurrence in the relationship between teachers and principals. So we see these things outside of the newsrooms, outside of the university. It is definitely an epidemic. We're seeing the contributions of women diminished, and even though there is increased visibility isn't enough. So.
Great, thank you, Professor Gessler. So Phil, the second question is for you, comparable to Professor Gessler's question. Has your podcast research given you any examples of periods where we've seen a lot of criticism coming from women, of women leaders?
One of the examples that I thought of actually was an episode that we did on the first American female mayor, a woman named Susanna Salter. And it's kind of a funny story because she didn't want to run for mayor. She didn't try to run for mayor. She was actually submitted on the ballot as a joke to embarrass women because they thought that she would lose the election so horribly that it would discourage other women from running. It was a group of men who submitted her, so it's not exactly a case of women tearing other women down. But she was a part of a group of activist group of women who advocated for prohibition and more puritanical type policies, but they submitted their own slate of candidates who were all men. And the idea was that women didn't see themselves in a role where they could serve in public office because, you know, a woman's place was in the home. And granted, this was late 1800s, it was 1870s, 1880s. So we are seeing a much more drastic shift from that mindset today. But even at the time, women couldn't see themselves running for office because then who would take care of the house? So when this woman, Susanna Salter, won the mayoral office completely by accident, she did serve that role where she was serving in the home, serving as the mayor, and she didn't necessarily accomplish any sweeping changes or anything super notable to history in her one term as mayor, but just being that first face of a woman holding this office, and frankly, the first woman to hold any elected office in America. And in that same episode, we read a lot about other women in roles in politics. The petticoat rulers was a huge example of that, and some of these other women that were the first examples of seeing women in these positions, and a lot of times that they struggled or didn't get reelected because women just didn't see that, other women who were voting for them didn't see that this was their place. It wasn't, they weren't represented in a way that you could recognize this is a woman's job to be in a position of political authority or to be in some type of power or decision making. So it takes people to be those first people to show that they can do it.
Excellent, thank you very much. Moving right along, video clip number 3.
Donna is tremendously empowered or engineer Jolie, but they all embody that exact same definition of sexuality. I mean, when you really think about it though, Hillary Clinton's tremendously empowered. She's Secretary of State, right? Or, you think of women CEOs, or, there are women who are empowered in lots of different kinds of you don't see them represented. You don't get that message. So you don't have to use your sexuality to attain empowerment in the world.
Okay, so this question again for Professor Gessler. Why do you think it is that hypersexualization of women in the media is one of the most prominent and positively perceived manners in which women are portrayed in the media?
Sex sells. We know this to be true. For a long time, and unfortunately still today, women very much our physical attributes are what is seen first. We know that through something called the beauty goodness standard, that women who are perceived as less physically attractive oftentimes are discriminated against. So, as a woman, if you're not considered traditionally, attractive or beautiful, you really don't have a place, right, in terms of visibility in media. So what can we do then, to make the general population more comfortable? What can we do to attract people to, make women accessible? Well, we make them sexy, right? We take off the clothes, we put them on perfume ads and alcohol advertisements, and the hypersexualization it's not going away. So when we have these conversations about efficacy, it's important to put women, those first women out of the advertisements when they're being hypersexualized into positions of power. Because if that's the only thing we put in front of people, that's the only way that they're going to see women. So if we really want to change how women are interacting in the workplace, how they're being treated, we have to first get that visual component of how we're constantly placing women in front of the eyes of others. Because if we continue to perpetuate that hypersexualization, then, the mind behind the women, their contributions throughout history, whether adding to the workplace now, it's going to be for.
Thank you, Professor Gessler. Would either of our other two panelists like to comment on this matter? No? All right. Anyone from the audience? Just checking back in? No? All right. Well, then we will move right along to video number 4.
The emphasis on women's appearance affects more than just women on screen. It's affecting women's ability to participate in the political process. Ironically, the more power women gain, the stronger the backlash against them. And this phenomenon is most evident in the way the media disrespects our female leaders.
She's irresistibly cute, let's put it that way. And the way she presents herself, obviously she's attractive and all that. Sarah Palin looks really hot in that hat. She just said that she doesn't know how cars work. Oh, that's crazy. You see the hat on her?
Both you and Sarah Palin are good-looking women. You're attractive, young, relatively young women.
Kagan's going to put on the U.S. Supreme Court. Is there such a thing about the aesthetics of the appointee? Let's put it to you this way. She's not the type of face you want to see on a $5 bill.
I noticed in Sotomayor and her club a bunch of vacuum cleaners help them clean up after their meetings.
Cynthia McKinney, the former congresswoman from Georgia, was another angry black woman.
Look at these skanks who make up the female leadership of the Democratic Party.
You know that ugly hag, Madeleine Albright? Remember her? A psycho. She was the Secretary of State under Clinton. Remember, like a fat moron.
And now we have the wicked witch of the West, Nancy Pelosi.
I think it's me and Melissa were still capable of human facial expression. You'd see she'd be embarrassed.
Nancy Pelosi, get another facelift, lady. Another reason why it's very rare to find a woman worthy of serving in political office.
It's my Pelosi.
And Hillary Rock Clinton, her finest, is no better than Dumbo with the big ears.
When she raises her voice, and when a lot of women do, as I say,
It reaches a point where every husband in America is hurting one time or another. You get a woman in the Oval Office, most powerful person in the world, what's the downside?
You mean besides the PMS and the mood swings?
I hate watching that clip, but it shows a good example of exactly what we're talking about. So in that vein, my first question is for Abigail. In your media environments, have you noticed this difference in media coverage of powerful men versus powerful women? And how do you approach this difference in your own experiences?
So I definitely have noticed a big difference, even like on the national level, all the way down to less national, like regional, local level, on how men and women are covered. I think in part because of this national media narrative that kind of trickles down. One big takeaway I took from watching that clip originally and then listening to it again just now was not one of those people's single comments was about the policies that these women have put in place or what they want to do in their political positions. So when we focus on a woman's voice, her appearance, whether or not she's likable enough, whether or not she's pretty enough, it puts barriers against social progress, against political progress, because when we don't talk about their policies, when we don't talk about what they want to do, how can we determine whether or not they're effective when they're in office? So I think that we need to kind of move beyond that to be able to discuss that. So in my experiences when I cover women, powerful women, I try not to ask them questions that I want to ask a man. One thing I took away from this documentary too that wasn't in this clip was nobody asks a man, well, how are you gonna watch your kids? Who's gonna watch your kids? Who's taking care of your home life while you're out doing this? So kind of keeping those things in the back of your head when you're interviewing these women and then discussing these kinds of things, I think is one way to kind of move away from that narrative.
Thank you, Abigail. And then Professor Gessler, for you as well, this idea of physical attributes being the focus in media organizations of women in power.
Yeah, I mean, to echo Abby, there's nothing substantive, right, in those comments, so we can all agree there. They were all very much focused on the physical presence. And one of the things that I would like to add is that, unfortunately, when it comes to the workplace culture in our country, I think everyone sort of accepts that we go to work, gotta do our job, and happiness and workplace equity and satisfaction, it's not really where it needs to be. So I think there's a lot of, you're tough. As a woman, everybody goes through this, everybody hears it, just let it roll off, they're silly. But it's not just about words, and it's not just about happiness. What we know is that women are actually 10 times more likely to receive complaints at work about how they look than men. People actually just go and complain about how they look, their workplace presence. And in response to that, we also know that for women, if your BMI, for every point, is above where you should be in the chart, your salary annually is going to be 2% less for every BMI point than for a woman who is considered traditionally beautiful in a workplace. So when we think it's just about the workplace environment, promotion and education, it's not. Right, we're looking at inequities that come in the form of salary, that come in the form of positions of power. I mean, the amount of women CEOs, we're still at less than 5% still. We have significantly less coverage of women, less than 20% of women are featured in the news media, even though we contribute to more than 50% of the workforce. So these figures just show us that it's not just talk. Right, it's not just things that happen behind the scenes. It's a systemic issue that we're seeing in, the financial future for those of us who are young women emerging into the workplaces, and we should be aware of.
Thank you very much. Video clip number 5.
the media has always been overwhelmingly in the hands of men. As you go up the ranks in media, fewer and fewer women and people of color exist at every rung of the ladder. That means that 97% of everything you know about yourself and about your country and your world comes from the male perspective. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that in a democracy where you talk about equality and full participation, you've got half of the population, more than half of the population not participating. Many years.
Okay, I'm gonna throw this back to Abigail. As a woman in media, do you feel you've experienced any types of obstacles or barriers that you believe are directly tied to your gender identification?
I think looking at the documentary, which was 10 years ago versus now, I do feel like I've experienced obstacles tied to my gender identification in my career, but I think they're much less than they were then or even 20 years ago. There's another section of this documentary where several female news anchors on national news discuss what kind of feedback they receive every day and and like Elyse said earlier, most of those comments they receive and most of the comments I receive are not about my work, they're about my appearance. Whether or not somebody watching like what I wore that day, whether or not they think I look like I should be on TV or not. I haven't received feedback that's negative about my work, it's all about my appearance. So I think that enacts a barrier for women because when those are the kinds of comments you receive, even subconsciously, you focus more on your appearance and the kind of work you could be doing or the kind of work you want to accomplish. So even in those kind of subtle ways, it happens.
Thank you very much, Abigail. And just to contribute to what Abigail said, before I taught journalism, I did work as a journalist, and thank goodness I was on radio, even though that was also terrifying for me, because I'm from the deep south originally, that's why I sound funny. But for any comments that I would get if I was broadcasting live on air, and I was doing very newsy traffic stuff, if we would get comments in the newsroom, it would always be comments about, oh, she sounds so soothing. I wish she would read me a bedtime story. Oh, very uncomfortable comments. And I did put my level best into reporting the news accurately and fairly. So I definitely felt that there was an additional barrier to my visibility and credibility being a woman and foreign. Please don't ask me to read you a bedtime story. Okay, next video clip.
People who employ other people tend to hire people who are a reflection of them. Hiring impacts the news directors, the journalists, the people who are going to cover the news. And of course, who reports the news very much is the factor in what kind of news is reported. When any group is not featured in the media, they have to wonder, well, what part do I play in this culture? There's actually an academic term for that. It's called symbolic annihilation.
Okay, so now, told you I was coming back. I'd like to throw this out to all the young in the audience, whether you, or actually all students in the audience, whether you are new to the higher ed environment, whether you have been in the world of work and then entered higher ed, or you left for a while, went to work, came back. I want to know from you, and please, thoughts are share as freely as you like. Those of you who are going to be re-entering the workforce at some point, be it in a year, maybe two when you graduate, or those of you who will be entering it for the first time, how does this idea of underrepresentation of different groups affect you, whether personally or professionally? So, someone at the back? Thank you, Dr. Song.
Well, this is strange. Hi. It's kind of interesting because I did work in fast food, but then I go into welding. So I'm an art student, so I'm doing a lot more welding right now and learning more about the plasma torch and TIG. And just to like go into different work part with new people, so I won't be there for most of the semester and come back. And people just give me the look of, well, why aren't you here? Why don't you look pretty? But if I did makeup, then you're not gonna see it. If I do hair, then my hair might catch on fire with some sparks. It's kind of funny to think, even with political styles, that your look is everything. But in a sense, it's kind of what's up here in your brain more than what you look like. Because I've met a lot of people that may be bigger, different colors, and they're really smart, and they make me feel powerful because they say, well, we're basically all human, we all have our thoughts, and sometimes we're wrong. And you gotta be powerful and do your voice to make a difference. So why not? Take it away.
Thank you very much for sharing. Anyone else? No? What about any of our panelists? Some of you might be new to the workforce, but some of us have been here for a while. How does this idea of underrepresentation of different groups in the workforce make you feel?
Well, I think just based on when groups aren't represented in the workforce, everybody suffers, because whether it's in public policy or whether it's in the media, if you don't have people in these decision-making boards or in these decision-making rooms who have had similar experiences to women or similar experiences to people of color, and how are you going to put in policy that helps these people or represents what these people have been through? So having underrepresentation in the workforce at the end of the day hurts everybody.
Thank you.
I wanted to add something because every one of these clips kind of reminds me of something that we've researched before. And one of the topics that came up when we were talking about Dr. Polly Murray was intersectionality, which is the idea that you can have quote unquote representation, but if your representation consists of a white woman and an African American male, yeah, you have people of color, you have both genders, but there's still a whole large group of the population, colored women, who aren't being represented. So you can display representation without really displaying representation. It's not something that, speaking outside the podcast in my personal life, like it's not something that I've necessarily been involved with, but I've worked for employers who liked a certain type of employee, shall I say, like they may be geared towards certain types of groups of people. I will say it's not my current employer, but a past employer that, maybe wasn't the most open to hiring certain groups of people. And that always bothered me because they would have, the token whatever employee. And it's something that still happens in the workforce today. Like, yeah, this documentary might be 10 years old, and the people that I read about are things that happened hundreds of years ago, but the same themes still come up today. And it's just kind of what Abigail said, like, it's more subtle maybe now. So we have the same problems, they're just maybe a little bit harder to recognize, and it's being mindful of the way that you approach people and the way that we treat people, to recognize the small sort of steps of marginalizing people that aren't maybe as blatant as some of the comments that we've seen in the documentary.
And just to add to that, I think that building on what Phil said, that there's an unfortunate movement right now especially for DEI and inclusion, that we're just checking boxes. People's attributes and who they are has become something that organizations seek to say, okay, well, we have this person, we have this gender identity, this sexual identity covered, right? But that's truly not what it's about. One of the things that I talk a lot about in my class is the idea of a lens. And the best way that I can explain it to my students is every single person in the world wears a pair of glasses, that we see and we interpret the world through. And one of the missions that we really need to work on is considering what, everyone else's lens is, what they see when they look at the world. And the best thing that we can do to empower these people is sit back and listen, right? To educate ourselves and to research. And I just have to speak to Phil's point that you said you weren't a professional, but what you're doing is what I encourage my students to do every single day. To use the skill set of, curiosity and interest to learn, about these people and providing a platform in which we can talk about them. So although I've been really fortunate as someone who works in higher education that, especially in my department, we have a lot of representation of different types of people. We're very lucky for that. But it's definitely something that, I've seen amongst my students, amongst some of my peers, and that we need to continue to work towards.
Okay, thank you. Video clip number 7. Oh, Dora.
Yes. Sorry. Am I
Sorry, I didn't see you hiding in the back with your
I
cue.
know I'm just gonna say.
Yep.
So the diversity is this is my observation. As a person who's coming from different country, as a minority guy in this room as well, I had a chance to visit various big companies in New York City as a visiting professor a few years ago. And my observation at the time was the big agencies like including CBS or NBC and advertising agencies, they have a vice president for the diversity, DEI. This is a new trend. And they just not build that position to feel that those people from representing the minority, but they found that listening different voices from different background will actually contribute the profit of the company. And they realize that. And now I hear more people and more group companies are talking about we need to be open-minded. They cannot be ignored. We need to listen to them. We can learn something from them. And this is my observation. Even while YSU, we have this committee, which is pretty new, right? And also, YSU has the university committee for DEI. So that is something we cannot ignore. This is like a new that we cannot ignore. And we need to be also open-minded and listen. That is the beauty of the United States. I'm from South Korea. If you go to visit South Korea, it's boring. Everybody just looks the same, very homogeneous. They wear the same way, same hairstyle, same thinking. But here, everybody's different, and they all should be respected. That's what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Dr. Song. Anyone else before we move along?
Talking about the underrepresentation in the workforce, I look at it going into a career where it is heavily male dominated. It makes me nervous. That's just the best way that I can think about it. I'm very scared to not be taken seriously. I'm very scared. How am I going to find a job? I like when I go into a classroom and there's 30 of us and I'm one of 4 women. It doesn't make me very excited to go into the field that I thought was going to be like the most exciting part of my education. I was very excited to go into my field, and now as I go every day, it's a little bit less encouraging. It gets discouraging, and I'm nervous to go into the workforce because I'm scared that I'm not going to be what people look for. I'm going into the type of medical field, and I know a lot of times there's discrimination where people do not want a female doctor. That just genuinely discourages me into continuing in what I want to be in. So the underrepresentation does need to be fixed so that more women want to go in there. And so instead of the 4 out of the 30, hopefully it's more 15, 20, something else. But honestly, just in one word, I could say is that it just makes me nervous. I'm not as excited, I would say.
Thank you for sharing your experience. I appreciate it. Dr. Song?
Yes.
2 rows down, and then turn it over to our resident troublemaker thereafter.
So I think that addressing the underrepresentation within the media and seeing how it affects people negatively, like making them nervous, whatever, I think we can take that into look at it positively. And me wanting to go into the media, I think that makes me, encourages me to want to empower more women and create more representation for them. So I think we can all collectively do that together and work together for that, so we can make people see that them going into a field such as being a doctor, the medical field, is something they should be empowered to do and not make them nervous. And I think men as well, they should see this and also take that into account and respect their female coworkers and lift them up and make them feel like they should be there, like they need to be there. We need you in this workforce. And same with just regular people, not wanting a doctor, them seeing more doctors represented in the media, they're like, oh, this person does have the right requirements to do what I need them to do. They will start wanting more female doctors as well. And yeah, so I think it's also could be a positive thing, seeing that we are underrepresented, just to build it up and make it more represented.
Thank you for sharing. And now to someone I consider one of my role models, Dr. Karpak. You have your microphone.
Thank you. I would like to share some of my experiences. In one of them, I was in a NATO meeting, and most of the participants were European countries. And I was at that time in Turkey, and I was the only woman in that conference. Actually, the person who addressed the audience, they just say, "Lady and the gentleman." That was the first time. Another interesting experience I found, in Turkey, there is no wage differences, even if you are male or female, so we are all paid the same. But I'm talking about academia, so I may not say the same thing for business. But when I went to England, I find out that some of my female colleagues were paid less than the male one. Another interesting experience was with my department chair. At that time, I was married and I was assistant professor, and he told me that he wished me to see full professor if I don't have a child. My response to him was, I don't have a child and I will become full professor. So I just wanted to share this experience with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karpak. We appreciate your perspective. Anyone else?
Thank you. I am a woman in STEM, and I'm a mechanical engineer. And I applied to many scholarship programs, and Jack here, he can vouch for me. There's just one program, and I'm the only women in there. And it's scary, but empowering at the same time to know that I'm the first, women, female. It's a good feeling, but walking into a room being dominated by men, it's a scary, nerve-wracking feeling. And walking into the classroom, I was expecting more men to be there, but there's luckily there's a growing population of women in engineering, and that's also empowering to see and get to be part of. I recently got offered this internship, and I went to visit their office. It was a good experience, but it was sad at the same time because there was about 40 employees there and only one female, you know? And again, it was scary to walk into that room and feel underrepresented. But again, I will be the second woman to work there, and that's empowering to be able to be one of the first to set an example and be a role model. So it's a good and a bad thing, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Okay, because we are coming up towards the end of the event, I'm going to skip the last two video clips and throw out to our panelists and anybody in the audience the last question. And this is something that the members of the WCBA DEI committee spend a great deal of time chatting about, and we will talk more about it at our meeting tomorrow morning as well. What can we, as a university who interacts with industry and the profession, do to help all of our students, but particularly students who are going into fields where they may be trailblazing or where they are historically underrepresented, feel more supported? And if that means you want me to come with you and yell at some folks, that's okay. I'm not afraid of that. But we are very conscious of the fact that our job doesn't end when you graduate and go away. We are there to support you into the career as well. So if anybody has any thoughts of things that we could consider, ways that we could make you feel more comfortable or more seen, more visible in the profession, please let us know.
I think just to start things off, as a woman who's recently graduated and going into a field where the first female news anchor started when my mom was 15 years old. So it's a relatively new profession for women. I think one thing that we can do both before we get to higher education, but also as we get to higher education in fields where women are not the majority or even equal to men in terms of how many women work in the field, is build up women's confidence going into that. So whether that be extra seminars or classes or support groups for women in STEM or support groups for women in media or whatever field is not necessarily dominated by media. I think a lot of what we discussed today is building up that confidence and building up that empowerment so that women have the confidence to go into that. And I think female mentorship too, women who have done it before, who can kind of give you a reality check as to what the field is going to be, but also giving those tools to your advantage so that you can help continue to break barriers is also something that would be really helpful.
Great, thank you, Abigail. What about some of our current students who may still be thinking about what the world of work waits for them? What can we maybe provide you while you're here that helps make you feel more supported in the field you're studying in?
They seem to be very comfortable.
I mean, that's great.
Yeah.
But just so you know, Professor Gessler has a point. I'll hand it over to her. But the conversation doesn't end at the end of this event. Please come find us. Even if after the event you want us to hand out some business cards or exchange email addresses, you want to have a one-on-one conversation, please feel empowered to do that. We want to hear your voice. It matters to us. Professor Gessler?
So I just wanted to mention really quickly, one of the most impactful trainings that I've ever completed, I actually completed last summer with Dr. Blundell, and it was called the Power Shift Project, which was created by the Freedom Forum, which is an institute that creates diversity, equity, inclusion training. It originally started in the media workplace about women, but during the training, they said a lot of DEI training before, and one of them was the idea of learning. So it builds on what Abby said, that one of the reasons I do what I do is because I love being a lifelong learner. But I think for those of us sometimes who, managers or teachers, we get so excited about what we do, we're not always good listeners. So I think that one of the things that I would tell students or my colleagues is that we need to be listening more. We need to be creating space for the students in our classrooms. And one of the most impactful things that they said to us was that you don't get to decide if you're an ally or if you're an advocate. The person that gets to decide if you're an advocate or an ally is those individuals in the minority group. So it's a constant quest and motion that we should be working to be advocates. We should be working to be allies throughout our entire life. And I think that really resonated and stayed with me. So one of the things that, I'm focusing on in my teaching is the idea of reflecting back on what can I do to create that space? What can I do to provide, an environment where my students feel comfortable in learning and engaging in these critical discussions. So really grateful for that training and the opportunity to share some of these things with you guys.
I wanted to add, this kind of goes along the last point too, when Elyse was talking about being that sometimes the person that checks that box. Obviously, for the students who are kind of the first in their don't ever put yourself in a position where you're uncomfortable in your workplace or in any setting group of people. But a lot of times when you are that, maybe you'll realize that you're that person who is just to check that box, and that can be a pretty uncomfortable feeling. I imagine I'm obviously not someone who might be in that position in most cases, but I think it can be discouraging and make you think that this is something you should step away from. But at the same time, we need those people because that is the representation. Our podcast, I don't know if I fully explained, we talk a lot about the lesser known people in history who kind of shaped the world, maybe not always intentionally. And a lot of those people were sometimes that token person who didn't step down from it. Those people who made the first step or the first advance and became that representation that other people would follow them. And one of the things that we discussed on an episode that was more geared towards entrepreneurship was about Madam C.J. Walker, who's the first African-American female millionaire. And she built up a huge company out of nothing. Her family was slaves. She was the first person in her family who was born free. But the two things we talked about is these people who have that entrepreneurial spirit, or the people that do make a difference, make history, make changes, are typically have two qualities. And the first is a willingness to take that first step, to be the difference maker, to take advantage of the opportunity that's presented to you. And number two, the perseverance to see it through. So you might be the first one in your position, you might be the first one in your field, but other people need you to be that first person. So when you do face challenges, when you feel marginalized or feel, nervous or scared in the position that you're in, there's other people watching you that are going to follow in your footsteps. So you could be that representation for your peers, the next generations or generations to come that see you as that person who made history and did something with it.
Thank you. Any other comments or willingness to share from the audience? Okay, well then in that zone, I'm actually going to share the last clip we had for you, not to discuss, but just as a good note to end on to kind of wrap up everything that we've shared today.
We make a mistake when we say you have to find role models who look like you. If Sally Ride, my dear friend, first female astronaut, had been waiting for a female astronaut role model, she would never have done it. And so I'm a big believer in finding your role models wherever you can find them, and people who inspire and stimulate you for whatever reason.
And that is the end of our discussion. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And if you wouldn't mind, join me in giving our panelists and yourselves a round of applause. Now get up. No, I'm just kidding, but please do pass through the atrium on your way out. There are still some refreshments available. Feel free to take some on your way out. And again, thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate it.
was fun. I'm sorry?
Thank you for doing it.
Oh my gosh, no, thank you for the comment. Definitely sparked the discussion.
Thanks to you both for being here. Microphone folks, and for being here. Thank goodness what I do is that driving horsepower behind it. Thank you to both of you for being here. I'm